The village sat quietly at the edge of long fields and open skies. Mornings arrived slowly there. The sun did not rush. It climbed gently, spreading soft light over the land, touching crops, trees, and small houses that had stood for generations. Life moved at its own pace, and everyone knew everyone else. Or at least, they believed they did. At the far end of the village lived a farmer. People saw him every day, but rarely spoke about him with much interest. He wore the same faded clothes year after year. His shoes were dusty, his hands rough, his face always calm. He drove an old tractor that coughed and complained as much as he did. He lived alone in a small house with a tin roof that rattled when the wind blew. To most villagers, his life looked hard and limited. They assumed he struggled, just like many farmers around them. Not far from there lived a single father with his young child. His life had not always been this way. Once he had dreams, plans, and a warm home filled with laughter. Then loss came quietly and stayed. His partner passed away after a short illness, leaving him alone with a child who still woke up at night calling for a voice that would never answer again. Since then, every day felt heavy. He worked wherever he could, earning just enough to survive. Some days he smiled for his child. Other days he barely managed to hold himself together. The village people knew his story and spoke of him with sympathy. They saw him as a man doing his best against bad luck. He rented a small house, patched his own clothes, and counted every coin before spending it. He worried constantly about school fees, food, and the future. Sleep rarely came easy to him. When it did, it was short and restless. One morning, the single dad walked through the village, looking for work. His last job had ended suddenly, and the fear of empty pockets pressed hard on his chest. His child needed food, books, and care. Pride had no place anymore. He asked shopkeepers, neighbors, anyone who might need help. Most shook their heads. Work was scarce, they said. Times were hard. That was when he noticed the farmer standing by the roadside, loading tools onto the old tractor. The farmer moved slowly but with purpose. Everything he did seemed planned, calm, and steady. The single dad watched for a moment before walking over. He felt unsure. The farmer did not look like someone who could offer much. Still, any work was better than none. He greeted the farmer politely and asked if there was any work he could help with. The farmer looked at him carefully. Not in a judging way, but as if trying to understand him. His eyes were quiet and thoughtful. After a short pause, the farmer nodded and said there was always work on the land. The pay would not be high, he warned, but it would be honest. The single dad agreed immediately. In his mind, he had already accepted that the pay would barely cover a meal. As they walked toward the fields, he noticed how large the land was. It stretched farther than he expected, disappearing into the distance. He wondered how one man managed all of it alone. Still, he assumed the farmer must be in debt, barely holding on, just like many others. They began work under the rising sun. The soil was warm, the air fresh. The farmer showed him what to do without many words. He did not rush or shout. He worked alongside him, matching his pace, never acting like a boss. During breaks, the farmer shared simple food and water, nothing fancy. Just enough. As hours passed, the single dad felt a strange sense of calm. The work was hard, but the quiet helped his mind rest. The farmer spoke little, but when he did, his words were thoughtful. He asked about the child, listened carefully, and did not offer empty advice. He did not speak about himself at all. At the end of the day, the farmer paid him fairly. The amount surprised the single dad. It was more than he expected. He thanked the farmer, feeling a mix of relief and confusion. Maybe the farmer was more stable than he looked, he thought. Or maybe this was just a good day. That evening, as the single dad walked home, he passed villagers talking near a shop. Someone mentioned the farmer in passing, calling him poor and lonely. The single dad almost agreed without thinking. That was the image everyone had. A man with little surviving day by day, but something did not sit right with him. The land, the fair pay, the calm confidence in the farmer's eyes. None of it matched the story people told. Back home, the single dad prepared dinner for his child. As they ate, the child smiled for the first time in days. That smile eased his heart more than anything else could. He realized that the day's work had given him more than money. It had given him hope. Later that night, lying on a thin mattress, he thought about the farmer again. He wondered how a man who looked so simple could carry himself with such peace. He pushed the thought aside, telling himself not to overthink. Tomorrow, he would return to the fields. Work was work. Survival came first. Outside, the village slept under the stars. The farmer's house stood quietly at the edge of the land, lights off early, the same as always. To the world, nothing had changed. No one knew that a story had begun, one that would slowly challenge every belief the single dad held about poverty, wealth, and what it truly meant to be rich. The next morning came earlier than expected. The single dad woke up before the sun, his body still sore from the long day in the fields. For a moment, he thought about staying in bed. But then he heard his child stirring, whispering his name, and the weight of responsibility pushed him up. He prepared a simple breakfast, packed what little food he could, and promised his child he would be back before dark. As he walked toward the fields, the village was quiet. Only birds and distant sounds of movement broke the silence. When he reached the land, the farmer was already there. He stood near the crops, inspecting the soil with calm focus, as if listening to the ground itself. He greeted the single dad with a small nod and handed him tools without saying much. They worked side by side again. The sun climbed higher, and the heat settled in. Sweat soaked their clothes, and dust clung to their skin. The farmer moved steadily, never wasting energy. The single dad tried to keep up, surprised by the farmer's strength despite his age. There was no complaining, no rushing, just work done with quiet patience. During a short break, they sat under a tree. The farmer shared water and bread. The single dad thanked him and finally spoke about his life. Not in detail, just enough. He mentioned losing his partner, raising a child alone, and struggling to find stable work. He did not expect much response. The farmer listened carefully. He did not interrupt or offer pity. When the single dad finished, the farmer simply said that life tests everyone in different ways. Some tests are loud. Others are silent. Both can be heavy. His words were simple, but stayed with the single dad longer than he expected. As the days passed, the single dad returned to the fields regularly. The work became part of his routine. His child began to sleep better, knowing food would be on the table. Slowly, the fear in the single dad's chest eased. Still, something kept catching his attention. The farmer's land seemed endless. Different crops grew in neat sections. Equipment, though old, was well maintained. Nothing looked wasted or neglected. One afternoon, a man from the nearby town arrived in a clean vehicle. He spoke respectfully to the farmer, discussing harvest plans and delivery dates. The single dad noticed how the farmer listened carefully and asked sharp questions. When the visitor left, the single dad felt confused. This did not look like a man barely surviving. He wanted to ask questions but held back. It did not feel right. The farmer had never acted proud or important. He still ate simple food, wore old clothes, and worked like anyone else. Yet there was a quiet control in the way he handled things. That evening, the farmer paid him again. The amount was steady and fair. Enough to cover needs, with a little left over. For the first time in months, the single dad bought his child a small treat. The joy on the child's face brought tears to his eyes. He realized how close he had been to losing hope before this work came into his life. The village gossip, however, did not change. People still spoke about the farmer as if he were struggling. They pitied his lonely life and simple house. The single dad listened quietly, no longer fully believing their words. One night, after a long day, the farmer invited him to sit outside his house for tea. The house was modest, clean, and peaceful. No signs of luxury, but also no signs of desperation. As they drank tea, the farmer spoke about the land. He talked about patience, seasons, and planning ahead. He said wealth comes and goes, but discipline stays. The single dad listened closely. These were not words of a man worried about survival. They were words of someone who had learned from life, perhaps from loss and mistakes of his own. When the single dad left that night, he felt something shift inside him. He still saw himself as poor, but he no longer saw the farmer that way. There was something hidden beneath the surface, something he did not yet understand. As he walked home under the dark sky, he realized this work was changing him, not just his wallet, but his thinking. For the first time since his partner's passing, he felt a quiet sense of direction. He did not know where it would lead, but he knew one thing for sure. The farmer was not who everyone believed him to be. In the truth, whatever it was slowly coming closer. Days turned into weeks, and the single dad found himself settling into the rhythm of the farm. Each day began before sunrise and ended only when the last light of evening touched the horizon. He carried tools, tilled the land, and learned to work with patience. The air smelled of earth and growing things, and the sun seemed to give strength in its warmth. He started noticing the little details of the farm, the way the soil smelled after rain, how the wind moved through the tall crops, and the birds that arrived each morning without fail. The farmer remained a man of few words. Most of the time he worked in silence, letting the land speak through its growth and harvest. But when he spoke, his words carried weight. One afternoon, while repairing an old fence, he looked at the single dad and said, "Life is never only what you see. Sometimes it hides itself in quiet corners. If you only judge by what appears, you will always miss the truth." The single dad had paused, holding a hammer midair. He wondered what the farmer meant, thought of his own life, struggling and scraping every day. Maybe he was missing something, some quiet truth that people like the farmer held. But he could not yet understand what it was. One evening, the single dad stayed a little longer to help the farmer organize supplies. In the small shed, he saw stacks of tools, bags of seeds, and containers of fertilizer. Everything was clean, orderly, and well-maintained. Nothing was wasted. The single dad started to realize that the farmer had a plan for everything. Nothing was left to chance. He began to understand that the farmer's simplicity was not from lack, but from careful thought. Curiosity began to grow. One morning, when the single dad arrived at the fields, he saw the farmer talking to a man in a suit. They were discussing papers, making notes, and checking numbers. The single dad stood behind the fence quietly, watching. The man in the suit left after an hour, shaking hands with the farmer and nodding respectfully. The single dad's mind raced. How could this man, who lived so simply, deal with business matters like this? How could he manage such responsibility? Without showing stress or greed, he asked the farmer the next day, trying not to sound too direct. The farmer smiled slightly and said, "I do not need to wear fine clothes to know what I have. I have worked for years, made careful decisions, and learned to value what matters. Wealth is not always what people see." The single dad thought about this during the day. He worked harder than ever, trying to understand the rhythm of the farm and the farmer's ways. Slowly, he began to notice patterns: when to plant, when to harvest, how to preserve crops, how to handle money, and how to plan for the future. Every small action carried purpose. Every decision had a reason. One day, as they rested under the shade of a tree, the single dad opened up more about his struggles. He spoke about bills, school fees, and the constant worry for his child. The farmer listened without interruption. After a pause, he said quietly, "You carry a heavy burden alone, but there is nothing wrong in seeking help or learning new ways. Sometimes the hardest work is not on the land, but in the mind." The single dad felt a spark of hope. He realized that the farmer did not judge him. Instead, he offered guidance, quietly and respectfully. The words were not commands or orders. They were lessons wrapped in experience. Slowly, the single dad began to learn not just farming techniques, but ways to think, to plan, and to grow stronger. Over the next few days, the single dad discovered more about the farm than he ever expected. There were hidden barns full of supplies, tools maintained with care, and records neatly kept. The land itself seemed rich beyond what the eyes could see. He realized the farmer was not struggling. The farmer had managed to achieve stability and security quietly. Without needing to show it to the world, The realization hit him one evening as they walked home. The farmer had offered him a small cup of tea, and they walked slowly across the fields. The sky was wide and orange with sunset. The single dad finally asked, "How did you do it? How did you manage to live like this quietly and still have everything?" The farmer looked at him calmly, his eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. Life is not always about what people see. Many believe that wealth is only what is shown. But true wealth is knowledge, patience, and care. If you live with honesty and plan carefully, you can have more than you need. The rest is only noise. The single dad felt a mix of amazement and humility. He realized he had judged this man by appearances, as others had. The farmer's calm life, his simple clothes and quiet home had hidden wisdom and stability that others could not see. He understood that people often confuse simplicity with poverty, that true richness could live quietly behind the surface. That night at home, he thought about his own life. He remembered times when he had worried needlessly, fought with pride, or judged others unfairly. He saw how much of his struggle had been mental, not just physical or financial. The farmer had shown him that there was a different way that combined work, patience, and planning. It was not easy, but it was steady, reliable, and life-changing. Days passed, and the single dad continued working on the farm. He learned new skills, gained confidence, and began to see possibilities he had never considered. He started saving money carefully, keeping track of his expenses, and planning for his child's future. The lessons from the farmer were simple, yet powerful, and they began to change his life quietly, one day at a time. He also noticed the subtle ways the farmer cared for others. The farmer did not boast or demand respect. Instead, he treated everyone with fairness and dignity. Neighbors came for advice, people sought guidance, and the farmer gave it freely, without pride or expectation. The single dad realized that wealth could be measured in more than money. It could be measured in wisdom, patience, and kindness. By the end of the part, the single dad began to feel a sense of possibility he had not known in years. Life was still difficult, but he understood now that challenges could be met with quiet strength and planning. The farmer had become more than a man who offered work. He had become a teacher, a guide, a living example that appearances could be deceiving. So true wealth often lives quietly beneath the surface. One morning, the single dad arrived at the farm feeling tired and anxious. The previous week had been harder than usual. Bills were overdue, his child's school needed supplies, and he could not shake the fear of falling behind. He carried this weight silently as he walked toward the fields, feeling the familiar mix of hope and worry. When he arrived, the farmer was already at work, moving among the crops with calm precision. He noticed the single dad immediately and gave a small nod, as if acknowledging the struggle without words. The single dad began his work, hands and back aching from the labor. But the sight of the vast land and the organized crops brought a strange sense of peace. It reminded him that life could be managed, step by step, even when it felt overwhelming. The farmer worked beside him, as always, showing no signs of hurry or complaint. The quiet presence of someone so composed and experienced offered comfort in its own way. Later in the day, as they rested under the shade of an old tree, the single dad could no longer hold his worries to himself. He spoke quietly, almost embarrassed, about his mounting debts and the fear of losing his home. He explained how he wanted to provide for his child, but often felt powerless. The farmer listened, as he always did, without interrupting or offering immediate solutions. The silence was not empty. It was filled with understanding. Finally, the farmer spoke. Sometimes, life brings challenges that cannot be solved alone. Strength is not only in the work of your hands, but also in accepting help when it comes. No shame in that. The single dad looked at him, puzzled but intrigued. The farmer continued, explaining that he had noticed the struggles quietly and had decided to offer more than just work. He spoke about helping the single dad with school supplies, providing steady work, and guiding him on how to manage his earnings to prepare for the future. The help was offered humbly, without pride, without making the single dad feel weak or inferior. The single dad felt a mix of relief and gratitude, tinged with disbelief. He had never expected this from someone he assumed was struggling as he was. The farmer's simple lifestyle had hidden stability and wisdom, and now it also carried unexpected generosity. For the first time, the single dad felt supported in a way that went beyond money. He felt guidance, mentorship, and respect. Days turned into weeks, and the support transformed the single dad's life. With the farmer's guidance, he learned how to budget carefully, plan for the child's needs, and prepare for unexpected problems. The farmer did not just give money, he taught skills, shared knowledge, and built confidence. Slowly, the single dad began to feel capable again. He could see a path forward even when obstacles arose. Meanwhile, the child noticed the change as well. Nights were quieter, smiles were more frequent, and there was a new sense of security at home. The single dad's hope became contagious, spreading to the child, who began to show curiosity and joy that had been missing for months. Together, they began to feel the difference of having someone who believed in them without judgment. The farmer remained quiet about his actions, never boasting or seeking recognition. When neighbors commented on the single dad's apparent improvement, they attributed it to luck or divine favor. They did not know the full story. The single dad, however, knew. He had seen the care, thoughtfulness, and steady hand of someone who had chosen to help quietly, respectfully, and wisely. One afternoon, single dad asked the farmer why he chose to live so simply, despite having so much. The farmer smiled faintly and said, "Life teaches you that more than enough is enough. People confuse wealth with pride or show. I have what I need, and I choose peace over display. Helping others does not require grand gestures. Small, thoughtful actions often matter more." These words stayed with the single dad as he continued his daily routine. He worked harder, not out of desperation, but out of purpose. He felt a growing sense of agency over his life. With each day, he learned not just farming techniques, but also lessons in planning, patience, and humility. He began applying these principles in his personal life, feeling more capable and confident than he had in years. The child also flourished. School became less stressful because of the practical support provided by the farmer. The single dad could buy books and supplies without panic. Even small joys, like sharing treats or spending time together, became more frequent. Their home, though still modest, now carried warmth, security, and optimism. The single dad's perspective on life began to change. He realized that appearances could be deceptive. A simple home, plain clothes, or quiet demeanor did not indicate poverty or weakness. True strength often lived quietly in planning, patience, and a willingness to help without recognition. The farmer embodied this truth every day in action and word. By the end of this part, the single dad understood the depth of the farmer's influence. He was no longer merely someone who provided work. He was a mentor, a guide, and a model for living a meaningful, balanced life. The lessons learned extended far beyond the farm. They reached into the way the single dad viewed his child's future, managed his own life, and understood the true meaning of wealth, kindness, and humility. As evening fell, they walked home together, the child holding the single dad's hand, and the father feeling a rare sense of peace. The horizon glowed with the final light of day. The single dad looked at the farmer and realized that life had quietly offered him a gift far greater than money yet had given him: guidance, hope, and the wisdom to see beyond appearances. The single dad had settled into a new rhythm of life, one shaped by steady work, careful planning, and the quiet lessons he learned from the farmer. Each day began with purpose and ended with reflection. The simple yet meaningful guidance he had received had not only helped him survive, but also thrive in ways he had never imagined. The fear and uncertainty that had once dominated his life had slowly been replaced with confidence and hope. One morning, as he walked across the fields carrying tools and supplies, he felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. The sun was rising slowly, spreading warm light over the land, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh earth and growing crops. He paused for a moment, taking it all in, realizing that life could be rich without being loud or flashy. He remembered the farmer's words: "True wealth is often hidden." Living quietly in knowledge, patience, and care, his child ran ahead, laughing and chasing birds that took flight with the soft morning breeze. Watching that joy, the single dad felt a surge of gratitude. He had feared losing this kind of happiness, yet now it seemed within reach. The lessons from the farmer were not just about money or farming, they were about life itself, how to build it with care, wisdom, and kindness. The farmer greeted him with a small nod as he approached. The same calm demeanor, the same quiet strength. Together, they began work, moving through the fields in comfortable silence. Each task completed was a small victory, a demonstration of planning, patience, and focus. The single dad realized that the simple routines of work, care, and respect for the land were themselves forms of wealth. He had learned that life's true treasures often came quietly, in moments unnoticed by the world. Weeks turned into months. And the single dad saw transformation not just in himself, but in his child. School had become less stressful because of the farmer's guidance and the stability it brought. The child smiled more, laughed more, and even took initiative in small household tasks. Together, they were building a life of security, joy, and dignity. The single dad felt proud, not just of the work he accomplished, but of the way he was learning to guide his child, using the lessons he had received from the farmer. One afternoon, the farmer invited him to sit under the old tree at the edge of the fields. The single dad expected routine conversation, but the farmer spoke about something deeper that day. He shared his own story, not in great detail, but in small truths. He spoke of challenges faced, mistakes made, and the years it took to understand the value of quiet patience and careful planning. The single dad listened, realizing that this man, who seemed so simple on the surface, had experienced life fully and had emerged with wisdom beyond appearances. The single dad asked questions, not out of curiosity alone, but out of a desire to understand how to apply these lessons to his own life. The farmer spoke carefully, emphasizing that each person's path was different. But principles like honesty, patience, planning, and respect for others could guide anyone towards stability and fulfillment. The single dad began to see life through a new lens, recognizing that wealth was more than money. It was the ability to live with dignity, provide for loved ones, and navigate life's challenges with calm determination. Over time, the single dad applied these lessons consistently. He managed money carefully, planned for his child's education, and even started small projects that would bring additional stability. The fear that had once been constant was replaced by a steady confidence. He found that he could take joy in small victories and that his child could flourish in this secure environment. The bond between father and child grew stronger, nurtured by shared experiences, laughter, and a new sense of hope. The villagers noticed the change too. They saw a man who was once burdened and anxious become capable, confident, and steady. They commented on his improvement, though they could not know the full story. The single dad simply smiled quietly, knowing that the lessons he had received from the farmer had reshaped his life in ways that money alone could never have achieved. He carried a deep respect for the farmer, not just for his generosity, but for the wisdom, humility, and quiet strength he had witnessed every day. One day, as they worked together, the single dad realized the farmer had taught him the most important lesson of all: appearances can be deceiving. A simple home, worn clothes, or quiet demeanor did not indicate poverty or weakness. True strength and wealth often lived hidden in plain sight, in knowledge, discipline, and the ability to act with integrity and care. This realization changed the way he viewed the world, the people around him, and even himself. In the months that followed, the single dad continued to grow and build a life filled with dignity and hope. The child thrived. School became a place of curiosity rather than stress, and their home became warm, safe, and filled with small joys. He no longer feared the future, knowing that he had learned principles that could carry him and his child through challenges. And he had a mentor who had shown him by example that quiet wisdom could achieve more than loud wealth or status. One evening, as the sun set over the vast fields, the single dad and the farmer walked together toward the small house at the edge of the land. The horizon glowed in orange and gold, and the air was calm. The single dad felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for the practical help he had received, but for the life lessons that had changed him and his child forever. He realized that the farmer's gift was more than money, or where Kit was understanding, hope, and the wisdom to see beyond appearances. The single dad knew that his life would never be the same. He had discovered that stability, kindness, and knowledge were forms of wealth far greater than anything money alone could provide. The child, now confident and happy, ran ahead across the fields, and the single dad felt a quiet pride and joy. He had learned to navigate life's challenges with a new perspective, one that valued substance over appearance, patience over haste, and wisdom over pride. As night fell, they returned home together, the child holding his father's hand, and the father feeling a peace he had not known for years. The farmer remained a quiet presence, neither demanding recognition nor praise. The single dad understood fully now. True wealth often lives quietly, in deeds, in knowledge, and in the way people lift one another without making it known to the world. Life had taught him a lesson he would carry forever, a lesson of humility, strength, and hope that would guide him and his child for years to come, even after months of working with the farmer. The single dad felt that there was still much to learn. Life, he realized, was not just about surviving day to day, but about understanding people, opportunities, and the quiet power of consistency. One morning, he arrived at the farm with a new sense of purpose. The sun had barely risen, and the fields were covered in a soft mist, giving the land a gentle, mysterious glow. The air smelled of earth and growth, and for a moment, he paused, breathing deeply. Feeling the calm energy around him, the farmer was already moving through the crops, checking for weeds and inspecting the soil. His presence was steady and calm, a grounding force. When he saw the single dad, he nodded briefly, acknowledging his arrival without needing words. The single dad felt a mix of comfort and respect. This man had taught him lessons without ever demanding attention or praise. They began work, side by side in silence for a while. The single dad noticed the small ways the farmer approached tasks, how carefully he measured water, how gently he tended to young plants, and how thoughtfully he organized tools. Every action was purposeful. The single dad began to understand that life, much like farming, required attention, patience, and care in even the smallest details. During a short break, they sat under the shade of an old tree. The single dad had questions, thoughts he had been carrying for weeks. He asked the farmer how he managed to stay calm and focused through challenges, both big and small. The farmer looked at him, eyes thoughtful, and replied, "Calm comes from understanding. Focus comes from knowing what matters. Life will always have storms, but preparation and patience make them easier to navigate." The single dad considered these words carefully. His life had been full of chaos and fear since his partner had passed away. Now, he saw a new way of approaching problems. He realized that stress and worry often came from looking too far ahead or dwelling on things beyond control. The farmer's lessons were about living in the moment while planning for the future. Over the following days, single dad applied these ideas in practical ways. He began organizing his finances carefully, keeping track of expenses and planning for both expected and unexpected costs. He also started involving his child in small tasks, teaching responsibility and the importance of steady effort. The child began to understand the value of hard work and patience, and their bond grew stronger through shared responsibility and trust. One afternoon, while repairing an old fence, the single dad noticed a neighbor struggling to fix his own small field. Without thinking, he offered to help. The neighbor was grateful, and together they repaired the fence efficiently. The single dad felt a new sense of pride and fulfillment. He realized that the farmer's lessons extended beyond the farm. They were about helping others, building community, and sharing knowledge without expecting recognition. That evening, the single dad returned home with a sense of calm satisfaction. His child ran to meet him, eyes bright and smiling. The single dad prepared a simple meal, and they sat together, enjoying the warmth of the home they had slowly built. Even in small things like preparing food and cleaning up, the principles of patience, care, and respect began to show. Life felt manageable and full of possibility, rather than overwhelming and bleak. The single dad also began to reflect on his own journey. He realized how wrong he had been to judge the farmer initially based on appearances. The farmer's simple clothes, quiet demeanor, and modest home had concealed wisdom, stability, and a generous spirit. This understanding transformed how he viewed people in general. He learned to look beyond surface appearances and recognize the value in patience, experience, and quiet diligence. One morning, while tending to the crops, the single dad asked the farmer why he had chosen to help him so generously. The farmer smiled faintly and said, "Everyone needs guidance at some point. I was given lessons in my own time. I help because I can, quietly, without expecting thanks. Sometimes, the right help at the right moment can change a life." These words struck a deep chord. The single dad understood that generosity was not always about money. It was about time, attention, and guidance. The farmer's support had given him not only practical tools but also the confidence to face life's challenges and the wisdom to make decisions with care. In the weeks that followed, the single dad became more confident in his abilities. He managed the farm work efficiently, applied lessons in budgeting and planning, and began dreaming again about the future. He even started saving for small improvements in their home, creating a sense of stability and comfort that had been missing for so long. His child thrived in this environment, developing curiosity, resilience, and a sense of security. Neighbors began to notice changes too. They saw a man who was once anxious and uncertain, now moving with purpose and confidence. Some asked for advice or help, and the single dad shared what he had learned, passing along the quiet lessons of patience, planning, and care. The farmer watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction, knowing that the principles he had shared were taking root and spreading in meaningful ways. One evening, as the sun set over the fields, the single dad sat with his child, looking at the horizon painted in shades of orange and gold. He felt a deep sense of gratitude. The farmer had given him more than work. He had given guidance, understanding, and a framework for life. The single dad realized that the true richness in life came not from money alone, but from wisdom, kindness, patience, and the ability to lift others quietly as night fell. They returned to their modest home, the child holding his father's hand, full of laughter and curiosity. The single dad reflected on the journey he had taken. Life had not always been easy, but the lessons from the farmer had shown him a way to navigate challenges with calm, purpose, and dignity. He understood that appearances often deceived people, and true strength often lived quietly in actions, knowledge, and the care one gave to others. By the end of this part, the single dad had transformed not just in circumstances, but in mindset. He had learned to face life's challenges with confidence, to provide for his child thoughtfully, and to recognize the value of quiet wisdom and steady effort. The farmer's guidance had created a lasting impact, shaping a life that was stronger, more hopeful, and filled with dignity, showing that sometimes the most profound lessons come from those who live simply but wisely as the seasons changed. The single dad found himself more capable and confident than ever before. He had embraced the lessons of patience, care, and steady work, applying them not only to the farm, but to his own life and the well-being of his child. The small house they lived in no longer felt like a place of struggle. It was a home of security, learning, and quiet happiness. Even on days when challenges arose, he met them with calm, thinking through solutions rather than panicking or giving in to fear. The child had grown alongside these changes. Schoolwork was approached with curiosity and confidence, and even small chores around the house became opportunities for learning. The single dad realized that stability and patience could be taught by example. He was beginning to see the results of his efforts. Together, they laughed more, shared more, and faced life with a sense of partnership and understanding that had been missing before. One morning, the single dad arrived at the farm to find the farmer already at work in the fields. The air smelled of fresh soil and the faint scent of crops, and the sun's early rays cast a golden light across the land. The farmer's presence was calm and reassuring, as it always had been. Today, however, the single dad felt ready to take initiative, applying the principles he had learned over months of guidance. He began organizing work, suggesting small improvements in planting and irrigation, and taking responsibility for tasks that he had once handled uncertainly. The farmer observed silently, occasionally offering advice, but largely allowing the single dad to lead. This shift felt significant. It was a subtle acknowledgement that he had learned, grown, and could now act with independence and wisdom. The single dad felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. He realized that the farmer's true gift was not only in teaching practical skills, but also in building confidence, resilience, and the ability to see potential where others might see only struggle. As the day progressed, a group of villagers arrived, seeking guidance on their own farms. The single dad greeted them, remembering the lessons of patience and careful instruction he had learned. He shared knowledge about planting, tending crops, and managing resources. His words were simple but grounded in real experience, and the villagers listened attentively. The single dad felt a sense of fulfillment, understanding that teaching others was an extension of the help he had received. Wisdom and support, he realized, gained strength when shared quietly and respectfully. Later that afternoon, farmer called the single dad over to walk along the edge of the property. They spoke of life, choices, and the importance of maintaining humility even in the face of success. The farmer reminded him that appearances were often deceptive and that true wealth was measured not by what others saw, but by the stability, wisdom, and integrity cultivated quietly over time. The single dad listened, absorbing the words with the knowledge that he now had the life experience to understand them fully. That evening, the single dad returned home, greeted by the laughter and curiosity of his child. They shared a simple meal, and the father took time to reflect on the journey that had brought them here. The fear and uncertainty that had once dominated his thoughts were gone, replaced with confidence, calm, and a clear sense of direction. He realized that the lessons learned from the farmer extended beyond farming. They applied to every aspect of life: decision-making, relationships, and the pursuit of stability and happiness. Days turned into weeks, and the single dad's life continued to improve steadily. He managed his household with efficiency and care, provided for his child's needs, and even began planning small projects to expand their opportunities. The child thrived in this environment, becoming more confident, responsible, and joyful. The single dad noticed small changes in himself, too. A greater ability to remain calm under pressure, a growing sense of purpose, and a deeper understanding of how to balance work, family, and personal growth. One morning, as the single dad walked through the fields, he reflected on the farmer's impact. This man, who had appeared so simple at first glance, had transformed their lives through quiet support, patient guidance, and wise counsel. The single dad realized that wealth and success were often hidden, living in the knowledge, planning, consistent effort of those who did not seek recognition or praise. The farmer had taught him that the most important riches in life were patience, wisdom, kindness, and the ability to act with integrity. Later that day, the single dad encountered a challenge: unexpected damage to a section of the crops caused by heavy rain. He felt the familiar tension rising, but remembered the farmer's lessons. Rather than panic, he assessed the situation calmly, planning repairs and enlisting help when necessary. With careful work and persistence, the damage was repaired and the crops were preserved. The experience reinforced the principles of steady action, foresight, and practical problem-solving he had internalized in the evenings. As the single dad and his child sat together, he shared stories of the day, the lessons learned, and the importance of calm perseverance. The child, now growing in understanding and confidence, began to absorb these lessons naturally, showing curiosity and initiative in daily tasks. Their bond strengthened, rooted in shared effort, mutual respect, and the quiet guidance that transformed their lives. The villagers continued to notice the single dad's transformation. He was no longer seen as anxious or uncertain, but as capable, calm, and thoughtful. They came to him for advice, and he shared it generously, always remembering the humble example set by the farmer. This quiet leadership grew organically, and the single dad understood that true influence came from consistent action and integrity. rather than words or appearances. One evening, after a long day of work, the single dad and the farmer sat beneath the old tree. The sun was setting, casting warm hues across the fields. The farmer spoke briefly about life's unpredictable nature and the importance of maintaining balance, humility, and focus. The single dad listened, appreciating the depth of the guidance that had quietly shaped his life. He felt a profound sense of gratitude, recognizing that the farmer's support had not only improved their circumstances, but had instilled principles that would guide him and his child forever. As night fell, the single dad returned home with a calm heart. The child greeted him with laughter and excitement, and together they settled into their modest home, now filled with warmth, security, and optimism. The single dad reflected on the journey from fear and uncertainty to confidence, stability, and understanding. The farmer's influence had created a lasting impact, showing that true wealth often lives quietly in wisdom, patience, and the ability to support others without seeking recognition. By the end of this part, the single dad had fully embraced the lessons of the farmer. He had grown not only in practical skills and financial stability, but also in character, perspective, and resilience. He understood the value of humility, the power of quiet action, and the importance of teaching and guiding others when the opportunity arose. His life, once burdened by fear and uncertainty, was now filled with hope, purpose, and the enduring knowledge that true richness is measured not by appearances, but by the quiet, consistent actions that build a mean,